everyone, Ariel Adams here with Superlative Podcast. Please listen to aBlogtoWatch's other podcast, aBlogtoWatch Weekly, where we talk about the latest watch news and reviews. Today on Superlative, I have two guests, Efraim Grinberg, the CEO of Movado, and Margot Grinberg, the president of the Movado brand. Efraim and Margot, welcome.
Hi,
Thank
Ariel.
you so much for having us.
I'm actually really excited about this chat because unlike a lot of these brands that we have on the show, Movado is a name that I have been seeing ever since I was a young child. So in a way, it's kind of like a celebrity to me, like I'm somewhat starstruck, like, oh my gosh, you were everywhere and now I'm chatting with you. So I think that's interesting for me. And, during the 1990s, growing up, I think I saw the Movado Museum dial on more wrists than probably any other watch. Just to confirm, that was an important era for the brand, right?
That's a significant era for the brand, and we've had many important eras for the brand, and especially when you have a history that goes back almost having been founded in 1881, we're over 140 years old. So I think it was a really important era for the museum dial, and still watches inspired by the original museum dial account for a large portion of our sales. It probably is the single best-selling dial in the United States at any time.
What do you account for some of the success back then in the 1990s? I didn't think about it much as a kid, but you'd see the watches on men, you'd see it on women, you'd see the different styles, you'd see it on a strap, you'd see it on a bracelet. But I never really asked myself why this watch. It was undeniably appealing and sexy in a way that not a lot of other watches were. And it was also very much a lifestyle product because clearly it was not what you were using as a sports timer. So for those that grew up in that era, maybe what can you tell from behind the scenes of what you were doing so correctly to have that deep cultural penetration?
So I think it's really about how iconic the museum dial is. So while to many people it felt revolutionary and modern in the 1980s and the 1990s, it goes back to 1947.
Yeah.
And so it was really emanated from the Bauhaus school of design. When Nathan George Horowitz, an iconic American industrial designer, designed it. And it quickly won a lot of acclaims. Although nobody was willing to launch it as a watch. So in his archives, he has, and his archives are in the Cooper Hewitt Design Museum, so it's part of the Smithsonian in New York. In his archives, there's a letter from Albert Einstein congratulating him on such a revolutionary design, and he wrote, and he said it was really taking time down to its essence, and so it really got a tremendous amount of recognition in intellectual and design worlds. And in 1959, the dial was admitted into the Museum of Modern Art, the first watch dial in that collection, in its permanent design collection. So it's still there today. There were several prototypes made. In 1960, Movado bought the design. It was prior to our family owning the Movado brand. We bought it in 1983. So it really has become part of Movado's heritage, and we have a long and as I said, distinguished heritage, and we continue to create that hopefully excitement and heritage, both with museum inspired designs and other designs.
I think one of the things that many people don't know about that history, and I've written about it, and I think it's a fascinating history with Mr. Horwitz, is that it was originally a clock. And very rarely does a clock dial translate well to a watch face. It happens from time to time. But for me, that's an interesting component, as well as the fact that, at least for my generation, it's the first watch I can think of that really blends horology and art. It was sort of like wearing a piece of art on your wrist. Yes, a piece of art that told the time. But for me, I think that was a main element. Again, thinking about it, because it wasn't really just about jewelry. It said the person wearing this appreciates art and design and aesthetic. And every generation's had that. But I think it told that message really well. And I want to know if you agree or what you would add to that.
So I think one of the things that we really pride ourselves at Movado and throughout our history has been that we obviously take the mechanics of how a watch works really seriously. Having a long heritage as a Swiss-made, high-quality watch. But I think what we've also take very seriously is the aesthetics and the finishing and the quality of the outside of the watch and what the watch looks like and feels like on the wrist and what it says about you. It's why I've never really been scared by technology entering the watch business. And by that, I mean things like smartwatches, fitness watches and fitness devices, because I think we like to say that we make watches that connect to your heart and not to your phone. And I think that the museum watch certainly addressed that, and especially to a growing population of people who appreciated design and appreciated art. And we've carried that out beyond just the museum watch with associations with artists like Andy Warhol. We actually, it was one of the last things that he designed before he died was a watch for us.
Cool.
And we introduced that, I believe, in 1986 in an edition of 250 watches. So they're quite valuable today. And since that time, we've worked with a number of iconic artists, such as Max Beal or James Rosenquist. And most recently, we worked with I happen to be Cuban. My family came from Cuba as immigrants in 1960, but probably one of the most well-known Cuban artists who did not get appreciated till she was in her 90s. A woman by the name of Carmen Herrera, who designed a watch collection for us at, I believe, about 104 years old, right
Wow.
before, and she died after we launched the watch. She did not come to the launch, but she's a major, she was exhibited at the Whitney, and we were able to sponsor her her exhibition of sculptures at in front of City Hall in New York City through the Public Art Fund. So we were excited to be able to do that. And then most recently last year we launched an art series of limited edition watches with Derek Adams, an iconic African American artist.
Yeah, definitely. You've been doing collaborations for a long time, and I love how you do those. And of course, the Movado brand is more than the museum dial. But again, so many people know it for that, and so many of the products are based on that. Margot, a question for you: how important, according to you, is the museum dial for the Movado brand today?
It's extraordinarily important. It really is, iconic to the brand. It is, as he mentioned, a huge portion of what we do, and coming up with ways to make it and keep it relevant to consumers while staying true to what it is. And just figuring out how are new ways to design it. I'm wearing our museum bangle, which I think is a perfect example of what women are looking for in a watch, but still being true to the pure museum. And so it is really, Movado and the museum dial, I think, go hand in hand. I don't think you can think of the Movado brand without it. And I think what's so amazing about it is you can see it from far away and you immediately know that person is wearing a Movado.
It's a true icon. So here's a funny question. Of course, the purest design of the museum dial, for those that somehow don't know about it, it's essentially a blank slate with a circle at the 12 o'clock hour marker, which represents the sun. That was a key element on there. And that made sense because that was the top of the day. So it visually made sense. It artistically made sense. It was perfect. But here's my question. Over the years, you've attempted to make various versions of it with hour markers. I like that. But my question is, do they do as well as the more austere, minimalist style?
Yeah, they do. And I think it's because there's, a broad audience of people that wear the museum dial. I mean, it's probably one of, as Efraim mentioned, or my dad, I guess is, it's not a secret, we have the same last name, mentioned that it's probably one of the most worn dials. And there's so many versions of it because of that. And some people want to be able to see the time more, with the markers. Some people just like a little less modern of a feel than no markers. But it really is, there's a version of it for everyone. And so I think that's what makes it so iconic, is there is no one right way to do it. And, Movado, which is one of my favorite things, means always in motion in Esperanto, which was a language that kind of was supposed to unify the world. And
I did not realize that.
And that really is at the essence of what the brand is about. Always moving forward, always thinking of what's next, but also staying true to who we are. And so we're always in motion and always trying to figure out, how do we keep this amazing design relevant to consumers?
Now, when it comes to some of the other designs that you've had, of course, there was the huge history of Movado prior to the museum dial ever existing. And since then, you've done a lot of things. A lot of brands, they love their icons, but they also don't want to be in the icon trap. You know what I mean? Audemars Piguet, I think, is a perfect example. They actually have it worse than others. They literally are just a Royal Oak brand. They would love to say that they're more than that, but in the modern sense, they've had no success, serious success outside of that. Now, Movado is a little bit different. You have this icon, and some people know the icon really more than the Movado brand. But if you look at the catalog, even today, you make a bunch of other successful stuff. How do you internally juggle the importance and popularity of the museum dial with the fact that as a dynamic brand, you obviously have other stuff? Is that ever a challenge?
Yeah, I think it can be a challenge, but I think that's what makes it so exciting. And I think the respect that the Movado brand has for all of the things it's done over its last 100 plus, almost 150 years is what allows us to be able to do these different things. And I think there is the consumer that, really loves the museum dial and wants a version of that. And then there's a lot of people who love what the brand's done before and our versions of how we bring them back today, and really being able to get a beautiful, well-made Swiss watch with the Movado history attached to it. And so, I think there's kind of room for both, and there's a lot of consumers out there. And so we're just really fortunate enough that we can speak to multiple and different audiences.
Yeah, and I think, just to add to that, that the breadth of our collection is really about offering consumers, and I've never been embarrassed about kind of trying to democratize luxury for consumers and make it accessible for them while keeping our high standards, being Swiss made, being relevant for consumers. But it's also about, as Margot said at the very beginning, about what the brand means. It means always in motion. So it means never standing still. And we love new products. We love design, and we love products designed, inspired from our rich heritage and history and our archives. I mean, I have, every time I see watches from our archives, and we have probably about 3,000 watches in our collection going back to the early 1900s. It is, to me, I get inspired again. I mean, and it's like I'm seeing them for the first time. The 1917 has been. We've owned the watch that inspired our newest introduction, which is the 1917 that we're introducing as we speak, which is a shaped non-museum dial watch from our heritage. I think you, Ariel, you're wearing one, so you can show the audience. And that watch we've owned for 20 or 30 years in our archives, but we got inspired by it about 2 years ago and said we need to recreate this watch. The time is now, and we have hundreds of watches like that are waiting to be recreated for one day.
That's so great that you mentioned that, because the brand really does have sort of all those icons. And I want to sort of focus on the point you made about sort of democratization of luxury. When I really got to know Movado was during this period where luxury for middle class was the most important segment in the luxury universe. Sort of this growing middle class was highly aspirational. Oftentimes people who had, we'll call normal, maybe humble upbringings, but wanted to show taste and class and some status, not in a ludicrously high-end way, but again, as part of sort of a upper middle class kind of lifestyle. As time has gone on, that market has changed vastly, but I think the importance of it has not. And I really appreciate this focus on making sure that there is, I hate to use the word accessible luxury because it sounds like a paradox, but again, I think luxury on a mainstream level, volume luxury, I think is really powerful, because as evidenced in the 1990s and the 1980s, you're able to satisfy people with, as you said, a nicely made art watch that doesn't have to be obscene in value because the thing is solid gold all the time, but very nicely made using modern technology and construction techniques, as well as presenting a level of emotion. And yes, always never stop moving is great, but I think what's also important is never stop delivering emotion, right? The moment you bore someone, the moment you've lost.
And I think that's our challenge every day. What we challenge ourselves and our teams with are to deliver excitement and a luxurious feeling to consumers at many different price points. And so I think the world continues to evolve and change. I think it's actually interesting to me. I think post-COVID, consumers reached up and bought. We saw middle-class consumers buying high-end luxury products because they had not been traveling. They had not been doing many things. They had saved a lot of money. We're seeing the world return to a more realistic level today of where consumers want to get great value and great products, but at reasonable levels. And I think we're seeing that whether it's in automobiles or whether it's in handbags, with the reemergence of strong handbag brands like Coach, or in apparel with great brands like Ralph Lauren and Hugo Boss. You're seeing that return of people wanting to buy high quality but get still good value for what they're spending.
I was going to say, I think something you also just hit on in your question is about the emotion. And I think there's a lot of emotion when it comes to buying a watch, as a lot of different, luxury type products. And so I think it's our job always, and our biggest challenge, but also the best part is trying to continue to connect with consumers emotionally and create products that they feel really proud and good to wear to mark those milestones, whether it's a promotion or a graduation or a wedding, and that they feel really proud to wear on a daily basis.
So the one thing in that regard that I've been really impressed, we launched on our website several years ago, probably about 2-3 years ago, in a limited way, engraving available on our watches, and we've had to expand that now to almost the whole collection, because consumers they're for sentimental occasions. And our watches have historically celebrated great moments for people. In fact, there was a Movado watch that was given after. I'm reading a book about Franklin Roosevelt and World War II. But at that time, when the war ended, the Swiss, to thank Churchill for his efforts in saving the world, gave him a Movado watch.
Oh, nice! I didn't know that.
Yep. So, and so we're involved in a lot of historical situations that obviously we weren't around then, but just because watches really represent an emotional connection and or it's what people get when they celebrate 20 years at work, or is often it used to be a gold watch, now it's a watch.
It'll be a gold watch again, maybe when gold goes down. But gold, that's the funny thing about gold. No matter what, people still like it, right? For thousands of years, we've been into gold. I want to go back to talking about the consumer today. And one of the things that I've realized is that in the information economy we have today, your average middle-income consumer has far more information available to them about products, especially watches. So 20, 30 years ago, somebody in a retail environment wanting to buy a watch for themselves typically knew a lot less or had less availability to do research and read reviews or understand about what looking at than today. Similar type of desire to buy, similar type of needs they have, but now they have new considerations and things like that. My question is, what has it been like for Movado, who sells to this audience, as their, I'll call it, informational needs and expectations have changed over time? Whereas it was maybe more of a fashion or feel-good type of purchase a while ago, now they want justifications and information, and they want to compare tech specs and things like that. How has that changed the dynamic on your end?
So I think the emotional connection is still important, but I think the consumer is a much more educated consumer. And, you're helping to do that, Ariel. Okay,
yeah,
it's people listening to podcasts like this, going on forums, learning about products and brands and what they stand for. And our job is to stay up with that and be able to talk directly to our consumers, is what I hope we're doing here today. I think Margot will expand on that, and I think we're excited. We do within our digital communication. We have a lot of employees who talk to whether they be in our creative department or designers, or because they want to, and we let them, and we want them to talk to consumers today, so we can give people a different perspective and a different level of education on our products and our designs, and I think it's a really exciting time, and we do research to learn about what our consumers are looking for too, and I found it fascinating, and this is brought on probably by the world that you've kind of led in developing, that we did a focus group in New Jersey, with suburban young men, Gen Z, and I would venture to say that this group had no idea what a millimeter was or what a meter was, but they all knew they wanted watches between 36 and 38 millimeters.
Interesting.
So they knew that that was the right size for them.
And I think you're like spot on, and that consumers have so much more access and want to know more. They care more. I think they care a lot more about what they're purchasing in that sense too. And so it's been our job to continue to educate consumers. We have a series we do on our TikTok and our social where we do these short videos, whether it's talking about a vintage watch that's inspired something modern or educating people on a piece of history or a new collection. And, not just, oh, here's a beautiful watch with, a blue dial, but what inspired it? What's the size? What's the type of movement? What's the materials we used? And all of these things are information we now share on our website and all of those things, because I think the consumer really cares. And that's what's really actually exciting to me is we have always put that level of thought, quality, and design into our product. And now they seem to care even more. And so we have an opportunity to educate them and to share with them all of these things that we've always done, but now they really want to know more. We also do a lot of things to educate the people that sell our watches in stores so that they also have the tools to, explain to consumers, everything from the types of movements we use, the types of, materials, finishing, and all of that. So I find that the exciting part. The most important part is just making sure you're reaching consumers where they want to consume that type of information, whether it's, any form of the social platforms, on your website, on podcasts, on, news articles. There's so many different ways to reach consumers, and it's just about making sure you're in the right places.
Efraim, you got to tell me more about this focus group. I love these types of situations where you learn from consumers, especially if they're not, the traditional watch buyer. What else did you learn from this session?
Well, these were consumers in their mid-20s, so generally younger than the average Movado consumer. But all of them knew Movado. Okay.
Oh, good.
Either they had seen it, or they had heard about it from their parents, or they knew their dad had one, and they all knew the museum dial, which was interesting. And then I think, but what you also found out, we also showed them a lot of the newness that we've developed, some that they did not know that we had, and they were all really excited by it and wanted to know when we were introducing some of the models, because some of them were new, and where they would be able to buy them. So it's really you learn a lot talking to people, and we do it both in focus groups and to kind of understand, are we telling our story the way we need to tell our story to new consumers. And I remember doing this, and we've done it for a long time. So doing it in the 2010s, early 2013, 14, 15, and at that time saying, are we going to be able to sell millennial consumers? Because that was what everybody was talking about then. And I remember people telling me millennials aren't going to wear watches. And so we ran focus groups because they had their phones, and their phones would tell them what time it is. And I've said, if I would lie to you if I would tell you that I don't look at my phone sometimes to see what time it is. But I wear a watch every day, and I think that what today, our biggest customer base are millennials. So the same group that people said weren't going to wear watches.
I remember those articles.
What?
I remember those articles. Babies born today will have no idea what a wristwatch is.
Uh-huh.
Never learned to tell time.
And at that time, we ran a focus group, and I remember a 25-year-old or 28-year-old, she's a millennial. She was a millennial then. She's a millennial now. You don't change. But she's older now, I'm sure. And she came in wearing one of our Movado Bold watches. And in the focus group, she says, and it was quartz, and she said, the watch doesn't work, the battery died. And she goes, but I don't want to give it up to get the battery changed. So she's wearing a watch that that for probably, I think ultimately got it fixed, but for 6 months that she was wearing every day without it being on time.
Because the emotional connection to it.
It had the emotional connection, and she said it finished, it made her feel put together, and I think that's what watches do to people, my watches, but also watches do is there are guys that we've had in focus groups say, I don't feel like I'm fully dressed to go to work till I put on a watch.
That's a perfect person to sell a second watch to, right?
That's right. That's right. No, those people generally have multiple watches.
Yeah. But I've met people like that before who appreciate the sentimental value a little bit more than its actual utility. And it's somewhat confusing. You're like, you could just, go get a battery change. It's pretty easy, actually.
That I learned this business working for my dad. So this is Margot's the third generation in this business. And we started out as the distributor of Piaget watches, which were the world's most expensive watches in the 1960s. Okay?
Oh, I didn't realize that.
Yes, it was at that time the average Piaget watch in 1960. I don't know how much. It was about $3,000, which was a lot of money in 1960.
It's like a Mercedes.
What? You could buy.
That was like a Mercedes.
Yeah, you could buy a car, and to me, there were always the way I learned this business. There were always cheaper ways to tell time. You could buy at that time. A Timex was $10. A Piaget was $3,000. So there were people who wanted to experience time and the timepiece very differently, and that still is as relevant today as it was it's even more relevant today, actually, obviously, than it was in the 1960s. It's also especially for men, it's sometimes one of the few accessories that they wear. But I think what's really exciting now is that for a few years there's been a lull in women's watches. We're seeing a real boom begin again in women's watches. So like with the watch that Margot is wearing, the Museum Bangle, we have another watch called the Mini Quest. We're introducing the Imperiale that I'm wearing. We're introducing a women's version as well, and an automatic women's version. So a lot of exciting.
And the 1917.
Yeah, and the 1917 for women, and so there's a lot of exciting things happening in the category, and for us, and so we're really, we have a very healthy women's business, but there's been more excitement back into the women's watch category than there has been in years. And part of that is the innovation of sizes and shapes, things like the 1917, the oval watch that Margot is wearing. Those create a new level of fashion and excitement for women that wasn't there, because the men's watch category has been very traditional, a lot of round watches, but we're seeing an excitement in shapes for men as well.
Oh, I totally agree. So much so that over the last couple of years, I found myself reviewing women's watches, not necessarily wearing them, but writing about them for a woman, because so many of them are beautiful or interesting, technically innovative. So I totally agree with you. And along the lines of what both of you have been saying, I think it's important to mention that the watch, I'll call it community today, really revolves around the fact that the product is a vector to a hobby and friendships and socializing. The expressive nature of a watch is so important because it expresses something to friends and people around you. Whereas 20, 30, 40 years ago, it was first a utility item, then there was sort of a layer of style on top of that. Today, it's a socializing item. It attracts attention. It's a membership into a club. It's become akin to maybe sports as a hobby, lots of statistics, lots of players, lots of arguing about who's best, or cars, or something else like that. It has become, and I've spoken to a lot of individuals who have reported this to me. They said, Ariel, if it wasn't for watches, I probably wouldn't have any friends or anything to do as an adult male, for example, right? That element has been so important to so many people. It has become a formal hobby. When I started this, it was a very informal hobby. A couple of nerds like me on the internet. You never really met another watch lover in person. You barely believe that someone else out there liked it as much as you. Now, I actually think some people wouldn't even buy the watches if not for the social element. And that represents an exciting but powerfully different dynamic than the industry has experienced, at least historically. You know what I mean?
Well, I think, that you actually have come full circle to kind of how we started the conversation, which is about how a watch is more than just telling time. It's an emotional connection for people. It's a conversation starter. It is, you can't drive your car or bring your house into a restaurant, but you can wear your watch into the restaurant.
At least not without consequences.
And it can spark a discussion, a connection with somebody, a description of, I got this watch when I bought it. You don't know how many times I get notes from people telling me that they got their watch when they bought the watch for themselves when they got a promotion. I got a letter from a woman a few years ago, an email, and this was one that was very different. Said, I bought myself my watch and I'm so excited that I just got this new Movado to celebrate my divorce. And I thought, that's
sure,
okay.
She's happy
You can
about
celebrate a lot of things.
I also think, to what you said, by having a much larger community really excited about watches, whether or not you are as passionate about watches as that community, I think it has this halo on the whole category of, this is something worth thinking about, something worth thinking about what you put on your wrist. And, for us, obviously, as people in this industry, just that, excitement around the history of watches, the brands, what they've done, where they're going, I think is just great for the overall category too. And it's exciting to see so many people want to learn more, and want to be part of the category, whether they're, really invested in it like you and like we are, or if they just begin their journey starting to figure out what's the right watch for them to buy. I think it just is good for the category. And I think you keep hearing from a lot of different even retailers talking about how great their watch businesses are. And I think that comes from just overall excitement across the board.
Movado has been making watches for well over 100 years. It all started in 1881 in La Chaux-de-Fonds, Switzerland. At the beginning of the 20th century, Movado started producing hundreds of wristwatch models, while other companies were still focused on pocket watches. Early watch designs often eschewed round cases for alternative shapes. Square-shaped wristwatches were an immediate hit with consumers from the very beginning. As early as 1917, Movado was releasing square watches at the outset of the Art Deco era, just before the Roaring '20s. Today, Movado honors that legacy with the new Heritage 1917 collection of men's and women's timepieces drawn directly from the authentic 1917 design. The Movado Heritage 1917 family of wristwatches features a variety of styles, including automatic mechanical movements in all of the 35mm wide versions. Inspired by the past, but faithful to modern expectations, the 1917 watches feature classic, legible dials, modest wearing proportions, and are available in a men's 35mm wide size and a women's 25mm wide size, as well as a choice of bracelet or strap attachment options. Designed with all wearers in mind, the Heritage 1917 is nevertheless an enthusiast product, featuring design excellence and Swiss-made mechanisms. Check out the Movado Heritage 1917 watches at department stores, select jewelers, or online at movado.com. Yeah, I have to admit, I would be the first to say I did not predict the popularity of this category in terms of what it is today, given my prediction 10 years ago. I would have thought that the watch industry would be around, but would still be kind of esoteric and niche and whatever. I am shocked and delighted, of course, that it is as popular and thriving as it is, and it looks like it'll remain that way, at least for the foreseeable future. I want to go back to something interesting that Efraim said about the focus group. And you said that you had these young men in the room, and of course you had them highly engaged, and you were showing them your products and telling them some history. And because they were focused on it and because they were engaged, they were absorbing the story, and they realized, I want to be a part of this, and I want this story to be part of my life. But what you managed to do, which is the hard part, is to get their attention. And that's what I find is interesting. It's sort of like, when you go to the watch factory, you've been to Switzerland, you
sure.
go there, it has your full attention, you see the people, you see the passion. It's almost impossible to walk away from that factory and not want what they make, right? But because you were highly engaged, you were focused. And what I found with the average consumers, if you can get them into that highly engaged, focused state, chances are they'll find something about your brand they like. But the challenge is getting them to open up, because they're trained to be closed, because there's so many brands wanting to be part of their life. They're like, whoa, 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 that's enough for today, folks. So I think that's what's interesting. Oftentimes companies have great stories, but it's kind of like creating a scenario where that consumer is open to hearing about it. And if you can get them to your factory or your office, yeah, that's a lot easier. How to do that remotely when you have moments or seconds of their day from time to time, that's where the challenge is, right?
Absolutely. I think the biggest challenge for any brand today is how do you break through and reach consumers? And, that's what we're hyper-focused on, or one of the many things that we're hyper-focused on with, all the different things we've done, whether it's through our brand ambassadors and we're, through the storytelling we do around certain collections as we launch them, and then finding where those consumers are. We're continuing to think about how do we bring you into our factory without actually taking every single consumer with us to Switzerland. But I think that is the challenge. But what makes it really exciting is how do you get your story and our story, which I think is so special and unique, in front of consumers in different mediums and different ways. But you're right, we have like a few seconds of their attention. And so it's about really capturing it really quickly, whether it's with an amazing shot of the watch or a little bit of storytelling of how it's made or someone they love wearing it, and just getting a bunch of those touch points over time to bring them through the journey of really understanding who we are.
And I think that the just along the lines of what you just said, both of you just said, it was to me, it was at the beginning when you get young guys, young women are different, but you get young guys in a focus group, and it's hard to get them to talk. Then they start talking, and they couldn't stop talking. I mean, we started this, it was at 8:00. It was supposed to end at 9:30. At about 10:00, the person came in and said, I think we have to close up the office now because you hold them in a research facility. And so they didn't want to leave because they were excited talking about our watches and talking about the category overall. So, and you're right, it built a community.
Now, for a number of years, while Movado was, of course, making and selling watches, it wasn't always known as an enthusiast brand. And that was, of course, because you were selling often via wholesale. You had your own stores, mass audience, department stores. It was a big box brand. Uh-huh. Now, I think there's been, I'll call it a shift, where the company has, at least for my opinion, a lot more what I call enthusiast grade watches, right? You're not just looking at the heritage, but you're also focused on designs that make a lot of sense, a lot of ergonomics, value for money, good mechanical movements, and some really nice materials and designs and things like that. My question for you is to talk about the duality of appealing to an enthusiast, which is maybe a bit of a smaller group, while also at the same time appealing to the mainstream. They're both different audiences. They both have different types of concerns and considerations. But these days, you almost need to talk to both of them in order to, reach the goals you have. Talk a little bit about this relatively new effort, which is both making watches for enthusiasts, but also, as we're doing now, communicating with that community.
Look, I think, and as I said, I think earlier in the conversation, part of what we as a mission that we've wanted to do is democratize high quality watches and Swiss watches and luxury for people. So to do that, want to you want to be inclusive of customers and consumers, and that's what we've done throughout our history and throughout Movado's history. So even when it was making its first automatic chronographs in the 1960s, those watches were $250, which it wasn't the most expensive watch at that time. It was a spectacular watch. Actually, it was done in conjunction with Zenith and the development of the Zenith El Primero.
I know those watches. They were awesome.
El Primero movement. Today, those watches go for $10,000 if you find one on in the vintage market. And so to me, we love having this now, I think, vintage following, as well as being able to recreate and get watches that are inspired by these historic timepieces, to be available for consumers today at in a high quality way, finished beautifully at accessible prices relative to what we're offering. I've always believed that if we make a $1,000 watch, I want you to feel like when you walk out with it on your wrist that you've bought a $5,000 watch, and the same for a $5,000 watch. That's where value comes in. It's not the price. It's, does our watch feel like it's worth more than what you were charged for it? And that makes a happy and a long-lasting consumer.
And I think we've done a lot of the things that the enthusiasts that you're talking about are appreciating more now. I think we're doing a better job communicating about it. I think because of the mediums that exist today and the ability for us to tell our story and reach people, I think you're seeing more of it. But the quality and the design has always been part of it and part of who we are. And I think it's, we're also watching where and what consumers want to be wearing. And I think a lot of what the watch enthusiasts and people who really know the brand or people who really know watches are loving in some of the stuff we're doing is also stuff that the, more, mass consumer is also looking for in the category. And so there's a blurring and a blending of those things. But for us, as long as we're making high quality, high designed product, we've done our job, I think, for any type of consumer that wants to buy the brand.
Yeah, I thank you for your responses. I just think it's interesting because I happen to be a watch marketing specialist. I study this stuff. And I noticed that when you have what we have today, what they call the internet first era, people are going to learn about a brand and a model often before they ever see it for themselves, right? So some of the things that Efraim's talking about where they look at the watch and they feel to themselves, that looks like more than it's worth, that happens later, right? That doesn't happen. That's not the first thing you have. It used to be that you walk into a store, maybe you didn't even know the brand or the model, but you saw it, you're like, hey, that looks nice. Oh, it's only that amount? So you begin with that emotion. Now, that emotion comes later down the line. And so my question is, from a online information presentation standpoint, and the Movado website is actually quite fancy. You've got a lot of stuff going on. What do you find is a nice blend of talking to that consumer that is an enthusiast by showing them you have a watch that fits their expectations in their world, that does their storytelling, but also to a mainstream person doesn't start to get, we'll call it too esoteric, giving them irrelevant facts. I mean, it's a really difficult blend because you're talking to multiple people on one page. Like maybe ideally you'd have different websites for each of them. But how do you again, internally talk about blending? There's no one way of doing it. It's an art more than a science, sure. But I just want to hear a little bit about some of the considerations that come up when you're talking about it as a team.
Yeah, I think we're looking at both sides of, and I think also you guys have done a great job of educating consumers, so they also know now to look for certain technical details or certain things. And so we always want to make that very easily available, knowing what type of, crystal, what type of movement, what type of, metals we're using. But I think a lot of it comes and where it blends is how you tell the story, right? And I think what people appreciate is hearing the the design decision behind it or what inspired that watch and having the imagery that goes along with it. So for people who really want to understand what it's made out of, the words are there, the terms they know. But then for people who are more inspired by the design or the style, that we tell that story through images. And I think if we find the right balance between the storytelling in words and the storytelling through imagery, we can satisfy both types of consumers. I think that's the balance we're always trying to look for, is how do we have the imagery that shows the angles, the finishes, that the best that we can, right? That because you aren't necessarily touching or feeling it. And then how do we use the words and the terms and the things that people who really have a knowledge and a care for watches to help them understand that. And I think it's really important because to what you're saying is it always was like, you didn't know what you wanted. You walked into the store, you saw watches, you picked it up, you touched it, and then you put it in the box at the end and you left with it. Now, you are making these big decisions through imagery and through words and through storytelling, and you don't actually get to experience that wow moment of putting it on your wrist until 3-4 days later when it comes in the mail. And so how we make our website and tell that story and give you that information. It's both your marketing tool and your salesperson. And so it's just kind of how do we blend those worlds for all different consumers?
Thank you for that response. I think it's just such an important evolving area because it's really that last mile problem, right? It's like, how do you get them to finish that transaction? They're interested. They generally like you. You're on the list. How do they seal the deal? And
there's no magic bullet, right? We're constantly evolving and trying to figure out, can we do this a little bit better? Did we give not enough information here? Should we have said that we use this type of steel, right? We're always thinking about those things too, right? And constantly tweaking, testing, and learning to be able to make sure that we keep getting better.
Now, today, there's this distinction between the consumer who will do what you're talking about and make a purchase we'll call sight unseen. I've been that person and others have. But then there's this other contingent of people, and I'm not sure if it's larger or the same size, but it's definitely a sizable group who definitely needs that in-person experience. Traditionally, Movado has been very advanced in that because you were in the stores that people were going to. Having that in-person experience was not tough. These days, and this is a challenge across many, many brands, getting people to know about the brand, pretty easy. They can do it. Getting people to actually see and touch and put it on their wrist and come to the conclusion for themselves, much harder to do. And we see brands right now putting, I think, record amounts of effort and resources into in-person events of some type, whether it's a trade show, it's their own event, it's a smaller watch event. But there's so much on-the-ground participation right now. And certain brands do that better than others. I'd say that it's easier for the brand new little guys, small team. They can show up to these small kind of wind-up style events. And then at the other end of the spectrum, you have these very high-end brands, small production numbers, huge prices. Speaking one-on-one with a client definitely makes sense. But then you have this middle that's trying to do more volume of sales than you could really handle on sort of a one-on-one basis. And I think it's still an open question of what do we do on a routine basis to make sure that human beings are able to see and touch our product. I'm not sure that anyone has perfect solutions for the brands in the middle. You're definitely one of those brands because you have a large enough volume and a low enough price point that you can't be going to like high-end car shows meeting consumers one-on-one, right? What for you are some of the things you're thinking about talking about or have done? And of course, you could do stuff with aBlogtoWatch. That's always a big part of it to get people to go that final mile, see and touch the product so they can actually make the decision. Do I want to buy one of these?
So I think that's a great question today. And I think one of the things that we've seen is the importance of retailers over, especially, people said, oh, brick and mortar retail is dead. That was, 3 years ago. No, it was overstored.
People love to kill things, right?
Right.
They love to predict death. I don't know what that's all about.
It was overstored and there were too many stores. But part of shopping is also the experience. Okay. And so consumers want that social experience. They want to interact with people in stores. They go to they're back in stores again. And, stores have realized, the ones now that have have closed a number of stores but stayed with their core best stores, have realized, okay, I have to invest in my stores. I have to make the stores look better. I have to light them better. I have to bring salespeople that are knowledgeable back into stores. So one of our big focuses this year is on educating salespeople in stores about our brand and our products, and continuing to do that. We did that to a great deal before COVID. During COVID, you obviously didn't do it at all because stores were closed and people moved to buying online. But I will tell you that in March of 2020, when we closed, I was wondering, hey, is anybody ever going to buy another watch? They quickly started shifting to the internet. They wanted watches, and it was one of the exciting things to actually see during that very difficult period was people, ordering our products online. So people began to feel more comfortable with that as well. Our online business exploded during that time and has grown since then. But then people quickly started to return to stores, and you're seeing that come into, the growth in stores is accelerating versus the growth online today. And so it kind of tells you people like both. And fortunately, we have a category where if you order it online and it isn't the right product for you, you can return it.
Certainly.
Unless, of course, you have it engraved. But
that's a good disclaimer.
Right. But you can't do that with a car if you order it online. Okay. They're not going to take it back. So you kind of have to, if you're not sure of the color, you have to go look at it.
Margot, what would you add to that?
Yeah, I think, to what he said is, we've seen really people want to go back into stores in a much larger way over the last 2 years. I think we're fortunate to partner with a lot of great retailers who are as invested to, supporting their remaining stores the way that we are supporting the education of their staff and how we look in those stores. And so, I think while there's no perfect recipe of what should be done online and what should be done on store, and I think there's also a lot of room for brands to do activations in certain cities to reach consumers. But at the same time, there's a lot of people buying our product across the country, and we can't ourselves be everywhere, to what you said.
What?
And so I know I wish I just go to every city, every town, and, with, a suitcase full of watches. And so I think we're really fortunate to be able to invest with our partners into making sure we present ourselves the way we want to, and that their staff is educated and to come to life for them. And there's always that consumer that wants to see it before they buy it. There's the consumer that's, I'll buy it online, return it if I don't want it. And then there's the people who discover in stores because they didn't know they were in the market for a watch till they walked through the department. And I think it's just kind of continually finding its equilibrium.
I'm really glad you brought up the retailer. I sort of think of them as the soldier on the ground that fights for you. And a lot of brands have decided we don't want armies, we want to do it all ourselves. And as you said, they have to hit the road all the time. And I've been writing about this a lot lately, and I still have some unpublished stuff. Your average brand CEO at a lot of companies is now their top salesperson too. Not by choice, but they are going constantly on the road, constantly having dinners with clients and things like that. And I see them doing that almost exclusively to the detriment of administration, making watches, designing watches, all that other stuff, to have other people do the client interaction, the selling for you because they're incentivized, is really what built this industry in a large way. And so I'm so glad that you're saying, we don't know, but we want to incentivize people who can, especially for their customers in their local areas within their own specialties. And I think that that's absolutely right. But it also marks a schism, if you will, in the watch industry between those companies who trust and invest in their external partners and those who say, no, we want to keep everything ourselves, do it all ourselves, own that customer relationship. We don't want to share with anyone. And I'm not really trying to put a value assessment on it from a morality because I think it depends on the company. But the reality is companies that do it themselves have a much higher hill to climb And if you're trying to sell a volume of watches, it's probably impossible, if not very unwise, to not want to reward locals. You are, again, you have an army that's willing to fight for you. And for me, as long as you have enough of them, you will succeed, because that's what's necessary. You need people to advocate on your behalf, zealously introduce product benefits, or simply be there at a time when somebody wants to celebrate their lives. Sometimes it's just a matter of that, right?
Yeah, I mean, you hear stories of, an independent, and someone walks in the store and there's, my son's graduating. What should I get him as a, college graduation gift? And, they'll tell him, oh, you have to get them a Movado. I think also it's about knowing who your consumer is and and what's the best way to reach your consumer. Think to what we said about our brand being this democratic, accessible, high quality luxury brand means you need to be where your consumer wants to shop. And for us, because we have so many different consumers across so many geographies in the US, the only way to reach all of them is to have strong retail partners that, we're lucky to work with.
So we only have a couple more minutes here, and I want to bring it back to some product, because what I want to make sure is that the people listening to this can imagine which of those Movado watches today they should get excited about. You have a large catalog. You make a lot of different things. We talked about the 1917, a review of which will probably be on aBlogtoWatch by the time people hear this episode. The Imperiale collection that is lovely. Talk about some of those models right now that a watch enthusiast, specifically people looking for mechanical watches, even though I think quartz watches are fine. Which are some directions that they should look at? They want to poke around on the Movado.com website. Where do you recommend they look at?
Well, I think the two you named are two of our newest introductions that are both automatic watches that we're really excited about. I love them both. Don't make me pick a favorite. But, the Imperiale, I think, is one of the best feeling watches on your wrist, the way it sits, the high polished bezel made with Duro 904 steel, the automatic movement with a custom rotor. And just the way it sits is, I think, one of the most, sometimes you can't explain why a watch feels so good on your wrist. It just does. The 1917 is our newest and, really first square watch in our heritage collection, based off of a watch from 1917. I think it is so dynamic. I love the color combinations. And I think it's just really what consumers are looking for, with shaped cases really trending. So those are definitely two. I think in the heritage collection as a whole, we have a bunch of different families, from the Datron to the Calendo Plan S. We have a lot of mechanical automatic watches within that collection that I love. We just introduced a new one called the Ondo Plan Sport, which has a Pepsi bezel. It's rotating, really cool, automatic, based on a watch called the Electronic Surf.
It's very fun.
From the 1970s. So you can read a little bit about that on our site. So I would say for those watch enthusiasts, those are some of my favorite and newest collections that we have. And I think we also have some really exciting stuff continuing to come throughout into next year as well. So, I think there's some really great mechanical high-end automatics that we're working on, and some really fun things in the Heritage Collection to celebrate some cool anniversaries of our archives.
Thank you. Efraim, what about your opinion?
I think that Margot covered a lot of what I'm excited about, and I think that the opportunity for consumers today to go online and explore this, the newness that we're talking about. I've never wanted to buy so many of our newer watches as I have this year. So it's as I said, we have this spectacular archive of probably 3,000 watches of watches dating back to the early 1900s, and that's inspired a high level of creativity with our within our design group and our designers, and it's kind of controlling that we don't launch too many new things at one time. So it certainly takes a high level of discipline. I also think that we're at an opportune time to bring women back into the young women and women and back into the category. And with a watch like what Margot's wearing is women have said, oh wow, I can wear a watch and layer it with jewelry. And that the 1917 that you're wearing, one of the magazines we shot Julianne Moore, who's one of our Movado ambassadors.
Pretty cool.
And she was wearing the women's version of the 1917 on a strap. That was a prototype because we hadn't delivered it yet. And she told our head of communications who had brought the watch there, she goes, oh, I'm keeping this watch. She goes, but it doesn't work. We'll get you one that works. She goes, no, but I love it. I want to wear it now. And she walked out with it. We since have replaced it with a working model, but
what a great story.
Yeah. So, it just shows you that people get connected and attached really quickly.
What about Vizio? Is the sub-brand coming back? I see there's a new one, and that kind of excited me.
There are 2 new automatics, which I think are really cool. I love the texture on that dial, and the notching on the bracelet's very iconic to the collection. It's a sub-family that we keep, that we think has a smaller part of our business, but a really important one. And we love that collection. And it has very iconic elements to it, like that notching on the bracelet, the texture of the dial, which, relates to the fact, the carbon fiber that has been used in the past in the collection. So it's a great watch.
I really want to see that one. Well, you've got me excited, and
I'm glad you're excited.
You're absolutely correct that there is a deep treasure trove of watches, not only from the archives, but new ideas that Movado seems to have. So we're out of time, but I want to thank you so much for being on the show. We should chat again because we didn't even get to talk about the design process, which is a whole other thing that we can chat about, but you'll have to come back on. So thank you, Efraim and Margot Grinberg from Movado. You can check out the latest Movado watches on their website, movado.com. Efraim and Margot, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ariel. You made this very easy.
Thank you so much for having us. It's been great.
And always stay in motion.